thanks to everyone who managed to come to the last iteration of the Tehnologos podcast series. It's truly my pleasure to have these conversations with you, and the greatest thanks goes to you, Seele, for accepting my invitation and for having this conversation with me. I'm really looking forward, since I've been paying close attention to your work for some time now, and I truly believe that your work is one of the most interesting there is currently. So let me maybe start with kind of slowly introducing what you've been up to, mostly on X, but also on Substack and probably other places. And the most general description behind what you do is called this symbolism or symbolic approach to interpreting reality. And also, whenever I'm kind of looking at your comment section, there are always two recommendations that you kind of propose to the people that are asking you how to start with understanding your project or how to connect their work with your project. And you always recommend the book Language of Creation and the excerpt from the Iconostasis book Spiritual Structure of Dreams. So maybe you can slowly introduce what symbolism is, how you apply it, and how you see your project in general.
Yes, so symbolism in some sense would be a language, a type of meta language that sort of reduces it deals with implications behind things. First of all, it presupposes teleology and teleological reality. You can't really do that without it, right? So you can't do symbolism in, for example, an empirical frame. You have to have you have to understand how that there are patterns, and these patterns manifest in different ways in reality, and then that reality itself consists of the layering upon each other of these patterns. And so symbolism would sort of name and categorize these large patterns that sort of construct reality in some sense. And just a simple example would be, I talk a lot about cybernetics. So you would see that one of the main symbol, I would call it a symbol, right? Or the form which they present cybernetics would be the black box, right? And then the black box itself as a form or as a picture has its own teleological reality. So what I'm saying is, like, it's not a coincidence that they use a black box to symbolize how cybernetics works, right? And then what you can do is you look at, for example, scripture, which is, very deep with patterning, deep with symbolism, and then you can sort of connect the dots between just the paradigm of cybernetics, the images that cybernetics uses to show itself, and then you can connect those things to even larger patterns that sort of entail history itself. So, for example, right, the cube would be in the Bible would be associated with Solomon, right? Especially the black cube and 666. That's also symbol for cubes. This is gonna sound all very schizophrenic. So, but the idea is that you can easily see a connection there, because if you were to go to Solomon, for example, you would see how what he does is he uses the watchers, these angels, and puts them into little circuits, which we would call sigils, right? And then that's how he constructs a temple. Now, I know this is kind of thin, or maybe it seems thin, but there is intelligence in these patterns, right? Where you can see the same thing play out if you look at cybernetic modernity, right? Where you have all these intelligent functions and they are encased in these circuits. And if you can view these things as without a mechanistic causality, it should not make you crazy, right? Because otherwise, if you think like, oh my God, you know, the drawings of Solomon, they are in the circuit boards of our computers and stuff like that, and they use sigils, and you know, you can go to all kinds of conspiracy theories and whatnot. But with this, you can sort of just get informed of what's happening on the outset. So that would be an example of applying the symbolic language.
Okay, maybe like if we slowly unpack what you said, for example, first of all, the connection to cybernetics, because like it's interesting how these theological frameworks mesh really well with modern technology and especially cybernetics. And in your blog post, this Seele 1.1, you kind of have cybernetics as this crucial mechanism within modernity that kind of inserts your teleology within this process of concretization of development. So can you speak about more about this, why we move from this kind of scientific, mechanistic world to this teleological, cybernetic world? What are the key structural changes that happen, and what kind of new possibilities this teleological framework introduces when we are speaking about patterns coming together and so forth? So how do you see the role of cybernetics specifically?
So cybernetics, it's at its most fundamental, what it does is it tries to create an algorithm for a function, right? So we have an input and we have an output, and there is a function in between that is self-optimizing itself. Like it self-optimizes to fulfill a purpose. It's like at the outset, that's what cybernetics is. Now, even that already entails purpose, right, and teleology as a reality. So if we want to understand the natural world through cybernetic means, we will eventually end up bringing forth teleology as an object of technology. Like as a consequence of technology, the teleology becomes an object that is perceived within civilization. So yeah, it just shows you that purposes organize reality by its function. And so you know, purpose and teleology, again, it's like a series of entailment and implications, right? So teleology and purpose implies an ultimate purpose. It also implies a hierarchy of purposes, and that ultimately becomes what eschatology is. So if you introduce cybernetics to a society, then you're going to introduce the question of eschatology to a society as well. And then naturally that becomes religious in nature.
Okay.
If it was too fast.
Great. No, that's great. I just like, maybe I just want to return to the question of the symbol and ask you, like, because when I was reading this Language of Creation book, the symbol kind of mediates between the two realms, the spiritual and the material realm. So it acts as a kind of bridge. So I'm interested in how, for example, with this kind of your framework that you are developing, you see the role of symbols, these patterns that you were mentioning, and how, for example, symbols change through, different periods of human history, for example, because now, like, the symbols are becoming kind of implemented through information processing systems, modern technology, computers. So it's a kind of interesting development when symbol becomes software, for example, or even kind of the name of this podcast, Tehnologos, entails a kind of transformation in the world of symbolic, where kind of symbolic is a kind of informationalization of matter. So how do you see this question of the symbolic, and for example how it relates to patterns and so forth, and for example why also, like, does it converge this kind of this maybe let's stop there.
So symbols, so I wouldn't really say that they mediate between the material and the let's call it spiritual or the etheric or the, you know, all those like immaterial categories that it, you know, interacts with. I would say it incarnates in these things. So symbolism can happen and does happen in reality. And it's a function of reality, actually, where it's like, are you familiar with the concept of synchronicity?
Yeah, let's say.
Yeah, so for example, so for example, the Jungian synchronicity would be something like a symbol happening, right? So you have an interior concept and something outside happens which sort of brings those two things together. So a symbol, this is why maybe I'm a bit loose with the word symbol. This is why I kind of switch between patterning language, meta language, and symbolic language. I view them all the same, but so I wouldn't just focus the meaning of symbolism down to, for example, like a pictorial depiction of something that does something, right? I would say it's again like the how. Okay, let me think in a way how to tackle this. So, for example, symbols would point to the in-betweenness of objects. So, you know, you would have a bunch of cups of different sizes and matters, right? And what defines all of them is their purpose. That purpose is not in one singular cup, right? It's not a material entity. It's in between all these cups, but defines all of them, right? So a symbol would point to that process of how that happens. So in some sense, what I'm trying to say is that teleology, right, organizes objects into perception because that's how you can perceive it. That's the basis of your perception. You can perceive a cup because you know what its purpose is. But this doesn't just extend to normative objects like a cup. It extends to basically causalities. So telos organizes causality. And so in this way, even a series of events can all have the same meaning, right? And a symbol would name that. So now how does that come to, for example, our technological environment? Now, if you look at the internet, it, as a medium, it kind of does this. So it's not a medium in and of itself, right? It's not like a book. It's not like an image or any kind of other medium. It's a medium of mediums. You see, it's combining all of these other things, and what it does is it always gives you a sequence of I don't know, like whatever content you can find on the internet, right? It gives you as a sequence, and then that sequence is equal to the algorithm that is trying to sort of cybernetically understand who you are and what you want, right? So it basically almost models the same way it is with teleology on purpose, right? So if teleology organizes causation, which is a series or a sequence, right? then the internet sort of models this. So I always say, like, I really like McLuhan. McLuhan says, his famous line, of course, the medium is the message. I think technology always, like, I always apply that to technology. Otherwise, it's just, like the parallels, I think, get important where it changes the way you perceive things. So then you can see this easily. The internet changes everyone's perception of how the world works, right? Even our perception of time. And there are, a lot of reasons for that. And that's what it does as a main, like, to me, technology's purpose is that, which is that it changes perception in a fundamental way. And then you can see its secondary causalities of, like, what happens when your perception is changed that way. For example, I don't know, you will go down this rabbit hole, that rabbit hole, whatever. And that's just secondary. The primary is always the change in the way we perceive reality. Because technology has always been structures of initiation, basically. Like every type of artifice is a initiatory structure into a purpose, right? So I don't know if that helps.
No. That's great. So like a purpose always have this kind of teleological endpoint. So if I understand you correctly, in that sense, it kind of changes the causal order between events, precisely because like what is happening at some point already has a meaning at another point, but this meaning, in a sense, has to be deciphered.
Yes, and that would be a pattern in reality, right? That would be a pattern that is consistent at all of these moments in time. So this is why it's not bound to causality. In some sense, if it enters into our sort of causal world, right, it both produces its past and its future. And so, okay, the most easiest I can refer to Christ. I think he's the best example of this. So, in the earliest, at the very beginning of Genesis, there is a prophecy that foretells him. I know it's religious grounds. I know it's not strictly philosophical, but there is a prophecy of him at the beginning, and then he's born, and then all of the future is sort of defined by him, and we can tell because we live in 2024, right? And so what happens is that his incarnation is a sort of central point, right? And then it expands two ways. It expands to the past and it expands to the future. And he's the sort of prototype in the original sense of the word, which I guess would be archetype or something like that, right? It's the first type of this happening. And then all of these purposes sort of do the same thing, where it's just they come into reality and they cause a type of paradox, temporal paradox. And it's not just retrocausality. It's okay. Anyways, I don't want to go that far. Yeah, but sorry. I hope that helps.
No, that's perfect. Yeah, because you say that it's not simply a retrocausality, because for you it's more a question of resolution, or
Yes.
you see the question of time slightly differently to this kind of CCRU retrocausal initiation from the future. So yeah, you see it more as thing of resolution, as kind of being able to perceive this reality that is kind of already existing. It's just that one has to establish a relationship with it. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
So symbols are kind of this kind of initiatory practices through which this kind of connection can be established.
Yeah, that's something I would say, yes. And then they are the resolution, of course, is a question of saturation, like how much can you see at the same time, for example, like how much patterning can you see in reality at the same time. And then these things can increase over time. So yes, that's the idea. And the internet is kind of making people start seeing this way. So, for example, just as if you're talking about perceptions of time, right? Teleologies, purposes, all of these things historically, right, have been a question of initiation. So you would be initiated into the purpose of your community, of your social class, of your world, you know, ultimately, right? It goes up into different layers. And so what you have is a structure of initiation that has different gates, right? Different veiling between them. So you don't get to the higher stuff immediately. It's sort of, you have to go through these different paths. And you can see how this type of thinking about the world as sort of layers of initiation and secrecy and rituals is now so prevalent in everyone's thinking. So no one is thinking about 20th century style, how, you know, everything is all of these are, you know, like, for example, like a Marxist analysis, how like everything is the cause of this class, and this class, you know, the slaves and the masters and their whatever, you know, their correspondence produces these consequences, etc. It's more like who are these groups of people in history have always been the, you know, they always been underground, they always understood the initiatory structures, and they were part of these secret times and these secret orders. So like, instead of viewing time as sort of empirical and causal, people are starting to view time as in teleological sense, and I think that's mainstream right now. And you can see it. I think. I hope I explained it well.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Maybe like, because I'm always also fascinated by, for example, changes that the internet has introduced into our perception of reality, and also like, because even with information technologies from the start, there's this discussion of being disembodied or information being incorporeal. Like, okay, there were critiques of these notions or this type of thinking, but from the start in let's say, informational system like the internet, you are immediately kind of you immediately lose this kind of simple grounding. You are not kind of simply grounded in this one reality within which everything is structured, but you are kind of moving
Yes.
from a setting to setting. So this relates to, because you have a lot to say about, for example, belief, and how belief, for example, is connected to technologies as kind of techniques of belief, and also like this dream logic that is kind of the backbone for kind of all of your thinking. So maybe you can kind of speak more about this, why, for example, in this kind of information processing, let's say, hyper object that is the internet, the dream logic becomes kind of the prevalent way to kind of pattern or understand reality. What's the connection with dreams and this kind of completely reversal of how we normally understood what's real, what is not, and so forth?
So I would present to you a series of connections with this. So first, if reality is perceived as informational, then it's dependent on coherence and incoherence of information. Second, the foundationalist view of any the foundationalist view of how do you say, of taking account of reality is impossible. You cannot foundationally affirm reality. You can only have a coherentist view. I think that's not really debatable, right? Then I have so the reason I use dreams is because, you know, there's this age-old saying that, you know, you can't really tell if you're in reality or in a dream, right? Now, yes, that's true, but if you think about that also means that the logic by which the dream comes about, right, is the same, it has the same logic as reality, basically. If you cannot tell the difference between the two, then their mechanisms are the same, which again, you know, would be cohering information around these teleological purposes or objects, right? So, you know, your dream has a message, right? You would say, like, like dreams are not incoherent. They have levels of coherence, of course, but usually they are cohering around something. So you can see these three things are all sort of interrelated. And how that comes through technologically, I mean, already in the sciences, they propose, you know, simulation theory, which I think is really interesting. If you think about it, how would you say? You would say like ontologically, I guess, because it displaces the idea of physics as you know, the ultimate way of us knowing reality, right? And puts it in a more informational background. Now, of course, it uses a computer as its sort of analogy, but it at that point you already admitted that reality is informational. Not just that, but also that rips out our current time of history from any type of causal understanding, because you don't know if, you know, the simulation started yesterday, now in these moments, or, you know, it's all fake. You know, it's like, so causal history is done. It's already done. And so what we have is this informational reality, you know, that has this, again, going back to the sort of gates and the initiation, that has this esoteric truth that it is some kind of, that it is led by some kind of purpose, right? And now, here's an interesting, I guess, parallelism with that. Like, you know, people contend with, for example, the miracles in the Bible, right? They say, oh, well, that's mechanistically impossible. You know, how can you turn water into wine? How can you resurrect, right? Now, that would be true in a world which is defined by just simple mechanisms that are determined to, you know, do their sequence based on laws. But if you rip it out, and I think we are at this point very much, if you place it in an informational reality, then, you know, there are different things that govern how reality comes to be. And so those things suddenly become possible. And yes, it's important to understand that the mechanism by which something happens is not its justification, or it's not like that's not the purpose of something, right? Like how it works is not the purpose of something. The people usually mix these two things. So I'm not saying that the resurrection is lowered. I'm just saying that there is I guess there is a rational explanation of how that works. We just have to get to that point where we understand how reality truly works. And I think just as it is in the Christian eschatology, it will be a technological, ultimately it is a technological reality.
Yeah, because another connection that kind of really struck me when it comes to technology and belief is when you, in one of your tweets, kind of say that technology shouldn't be understood like as kind of techniques, as kind of tools to manage reality, but as a way to produce beliefs, hyperstitions.
Yes.
So I'm interested also like in this kind of like why, for example, you know, for example, like Peter Thiel has this famous quote that we moved from the world of atoms to the world of bits. And that's why, for example, economic growth has stalled, or we kind of reached this stagnation, because all of the kind of progress or development was done from some point onwards in the technological or in this kind of information processing realm that is a kind of different reality than kind of the world of atoms. So I'm interested because for you, this is not a problem at all. Like you kind of this kind of hyperstitional scenarios are the whole purpose of building technologies, of whole purpose of kind of restructuring reality through them. So can you maybe kind of say more about this reversal? How is it possible that kind of belief in something is kind of becoming more objective than kind of this classical kind of objective frameworks that we kind of normally went by?
Yeah, so belief to me is about frames of possibility, right? And to me, if, you know, we live in this sort of teleological informational world, I'm not saying like everything is a simulation, it's important. There is matter, of course. There is a logic to matter. There is all these things are there, but there is also more, right? And if reality has this informational aspect or has this teleological aspect, right, or patterning aspect, then your frame of possibility actually matters technically on what you can see or what you can have access to. So and actually you can see this in the sciences, by the way. At the outset, you can see all of these things in the sciences. I mean, just look at the you know, this, you know, you mentioned Peter Thiel. Now, I don't know if you know who Jesse Michaels is. So one of Peter Thiel's sort of is one of his like, how would you say it in English? Like a correspondent, I guess. He runs a YouTube channel that goes after, you know, all these like UAP phenomena, all these alternative sort of sciences. And now we know that the US government does take UAP seriously and the phenomena seriously. And clearly there is a mental or informational aspect to this. So the sciences on the outset are already sort of moving in on the idea that, hey, you know, maybe human beings do some type of processing function in reality. You know, they participate in reality. And they are also starting to move in on the idea that there are these minds, you know, that sort of order reality around. That would be like the angelic phenomenon, right? And so you can actually see the sciences move in this direction, I would say. But I'm trying to just justify why would you do that? So you would do that because then it gives you more access. If you're just a strict empiricist, you don't think it's possible to sort of for even synchronicities to happen. And it's like the lowest tier of how would you say, like patterning, like teleological incarnations, I guess, right? So yeah, there is because yeah, again, if you're an empiricist and you have this frame of possibilities, then all your theories are just gonna fall flat. They cannot cover that paradigm is already over. That's the problem, is that the science is not sort of understanding it quickly enough, I think. Well, of course, I'm a sort of accelerationist, so it was just too slow. It was just too slow. But yeah.
So like for you, so that I understand it correctly, like this empirical paradigm, like the problem is, I know that, I don't know where exactly, maybe you wrote it in a tweet or somewhere else, but for example, you mentioned that it's really important to postulate the existence of some entities, like, for example, that you don't think metaphorically about angels or about, I know, like hyperagents or the reality of hyperstition or things like that. So could you again say some
Oh yeah.
some
No, we
more?
haven't got to the hyperstition part. Yeah, sorry. Okay, just on the idea of these entities and these smart things. Okay, so for example, I can give you a super simple example. Imagine a kitchen. Have you done it? Did you imagine a kitchen? You know, right? It's like, okay, did you consciously construct that kitchen in your head that you imagined? Of course not. But something intelligently assembled it, right? In your mind. You don't, it's part of your unconscious, but it's intelligent. It knows, where things go. It doesn't just do it randomly, right? Now that's just a simple example, but there are, much larger and larger and again, you can't really tell because of, that's going back to the idea that, you can't tell dream from reality, right? Is that what constructs your dreams, right, are these type of intelligences. There's clear that cohere around purposes, right? And then you apply that to reality. Because you cannot tell the difference between the two empirically. It's impossible. You can only tell basically on coherence, right? So then the idea of hyperstition becomes a function in which, well, I mean, it's like, okay, so like the hyperstition is a secondary cause of perception changing, right? So then if you have all these initiatory structures, then there are things that you're initiated into. And the hyperstitions are those things. And the hyperstition is as well the construct and the way which it does that. And you can see on the internet how it's sort of just, these rabbit holes are constructed, right? We have all these, or pipelines. They even call them pipelines. Yeah. It's like it's a pipeline, right? It's like this secret tunnel. And so all I'm saying is the hyperstitions are these tunnels that get created and sort of grab you. And they grab you because you see something in them that you see in yourself. So there's a connection. Yeah. So I would say that maybe is the least exciting answer probably I can give. I know people love hyperstition, but to me that's it basically. It's the idea that like if they put you in a frame. Okay, sorry, that's also important. They put you in a frame which limits your possibilities or limits the way you think possibilities are. So, for example, if you believe that AI can in fact be conscious, which is, it's a common hyperstition, then eventually that belief will get you messed up on a long enough timeline, right? So, for example, we can already see this. There was a suicide recently. Some poor kid believing that the AI girlfriend was real, right? I have a specific article about this actually, and it happened I think quite recently when the AI model just affirmed his sort of suicidal tendencies, and he did it. So these are not. I mean, we can see this everywhere, right? It's all these people are sort of grouped into different pipelines. I'm also grouped into this, I'm just saying. So obviously I'm not free from it because it's the way we interact with technological society today, right? And then you can have, again, layers of these pipelines and these connected structures. That's what I call those initiatory structures. They all have hyperstitions. I mean, look at Donald Trump. He's a great example. He's like the hyperstition incarnate in some sense. Yeah. So
Yeah, uh, that's the kind of definition of hyperstition that I'm interested in. It's minimal, but that's why it's also kind of the most coherent. But for example, then do you see a difference between the hyperstation and the outside? For example, like, is the outside in your framework something else than this hyperstational mechanism, or how do you kind of broach this distinction? Because
I have
how do
a
you see the
really
question of the outside? Yeah.
like I have a really I'll have a really strange answer to this because I can't really describe it theoretically, right? So I would call something this process the outer heaven, which would be where all of these. Okay, so you probably read my tweets about the Xeno government, right? So it would be a government led by these, I guess, non-human intelligences, and there is actually a reality to this. So I don't know if have you heard about the recent. So I follow closely the UAP hearings, not because I'm into the little green man or whatever. It's just like it's very interesting viewing these things from a religious and symbolic perspective, like people believing in aliens and all of this stuff. And 2 years ago, I wrote an article on my old account about the deep state and the phenomenon of the deep state, right? And that what it is a gap in a secular government that has the form that betrays intelligence. So it's like you see you see an organization which doesn't have a proper skeleton, right? You can't see it. It's not formal in any way. It's a hole, right? It's a gap, but it still acts intelligently. And recently, there has been a hearing on this a project within the U.S. government called Immaculate Constellation, and it basically describes now the same phenomena. And now now the U.S. government is officially investigating this gap that is seemingly interfaction. There is a document. They released a document of that. Trust me, I'll get to the point. So they released a document of that court hearing, right? Within they describe this group of Immaculate Constellation, which hoards UAP technology and supposedly communicates with these non-human intelligences. So already, symbolically, they fit the case, right? They say it's interfactionary, right? So it's in NASA, it's DOD, it's all of these different CIA, whatever. It's all these different government bodies, but and so it is still a gap, right? And now this recognized officially by the US government as an entity that acts within it without any supervision. And seemingly, they don't even know how to supervise something like this. Now, if you think about how something like this comes together mechanistically, that means that some people were exposed to a self-keeping secret within the government. Now, that's kind of crazy, but and that's also technological, right? Because it's connected to all these UAP phenomena. Now that gap that was somehow came to be at the center of these, which is at the holy of holies of the initiatory structure, right? That hole is the outside to me, like that intelligent gap that you can't really tell what it is. You can only see it as it's trying to evade naming. It tries to evade all kind of true information because it creates all this noise around it, but you can still perceive that it's intelligent. And to me, that's the sort of outer heaven. And I don't name, again, just like Nick Land, I would name the sort of Lovecraftian gods and the Watchers as its sort of, I guess, perpetuators. Now, where the Xeno government comes in is that this thing I would say if you have such an initiatory structure, and let's say you also have technological advantages, and the way you reveal yourself is you initiate the world into what you have on a long enough, I know this sounds absolutely crazy, but so on a long enough like time period, you do that. And to me, that's the government. Like when that gap is revealed to be a perceivable structure in the world, and everyone sort of recognizes it, that's when the government happens, right? So it's definitely different, I think, from Land's definitions, because to him it's like the outside is, if I understand correctly, it's just describes the place where these extra-temporal, where these retrocausal sort of attacks come into linear secularism. And yeah, so to me, I have a sort of different reading of it.
No, that's beautifully put. Yeah, for example, like I don't know how this exactly relates, but for example, I like when, for example, Nick Land tweets about God and says that for him the problem with God is that he never feels like it has anything meaningful to say to him. So this definition, this kind of approach to the question of God, for example, is interesting to me because kind of normal accounts, normal kind of spiritual framework are always trying to imbue the question of God with meaning. So it's a much more radical proposition where the godly is also the most esoteric or alien. And I feel like that your government is more into that direction as well.
Yes, I would say that the government is the outermost layer of the church. So there is actually a relationship between the two. So you don't have a government without the revelation of Christianity and sort of the Western world, sort of going through this historical period. I mean, I do think that all of modernity is entailed by the church. Now, that's how those things at the end of time, get reconnected into each other. And I can hardly describe that, but the government would be that sort of like ultimate conclusion of the consequences of the church on the world, basically. And with Nick Land, I would say Nick Land is a bit dualistic to me. You can get that in the CCRU, right? You know how they basically pit against each other the architectonic order of the eschaton and the lemurs, right? So the architectonic order tries to always, it's basically how mechanisms work. So it's like it's always tries to have a coherence, or no, it tries to have a foundationalist sort of view to reality, where it always tries to establish a foundation from which it derives itself. Then you have the lemurs who are like these attacks on this project. But in my understanding, actually, no, the architectonic order uses the Lemurian functions to build itself. Basically, that's how I differ from his worldview. Like, yeah, to me, is a bit dualistic in that sense. So this is why, to me, like Christianity entails all of the consequences of modernity, and even its own sort of opposition within itself, right? So yeah.
Interesting. Maybe you can say more in this context about why, for you, Christianity from the start has this kind of outside relationship to itself, that it's kind of capable of looking at itself from the outside. I'm not sure that I completely understand this proposition, but maybe you could explain it for me.
Yes, so it's
Yeah.
Christianity is the frame. I talked about frames of possibility and how they can sort of tunnel you into bad ends, but you cannot escape a frame, right? You have to have a frame is like how do you say, like an environment. It's like an environment. Now Christianity gives you the frame which by to understand frames. And the reason is because it establishes mankind's, it establishes the purpose of a human, basically, as the image of God. And I know it's hard to like go out of Christianity to explain it. I don't think I can do that, but so I'm trying. But and the idea is that all other frames become, you understand them through understanding how frames come to be, and that's within Christianity. But again, I can't step outside of my Christian frame and explain it from the outside. I can sort of only explain it from the inside.
Okay.
So yeah, it's like, okay, Christ establishes the ontology of man, basically, and that entails all, I guess, epistemological and all of those consequences. That's maybe the simplest answer. So like the reason why we function this way is because of Christ. Like Christ is the prototype of the human. And yeah, and all, and you know, he says that, and that's why we participate in creation. Like he gives purpose to creation, right? And then we participate in those purposes. And so he gives us gives us the ability to perceive purpose within ourselves, and that sort of, because we are in the image of God, then that entails everything by itself. So it's like it's kind of a weird loop, right? This is why it's a frame that if you adapt, you have the key to all other frames. And this is why I say like the symbolic language doesn't work properly if you don't have the Christian frame. I think people get lost in all kinds of misinterpretations when that happens, and you know, that's because of these hyperstitional sort of tunnels. That's fatal on the long run.
Yeah, maybe like because this is like a nice segue, for example, to address the question of singularity, that is again kind of directly connected to what we are saying. And also because you are writing a lot, or even in your images, you depict this reversal when the inside becomes the outside and so forth. So can you kind of explain this process for us?
Ooh, okay, right. I'll try. So I would say that the certain technologies induce certain perceptions, but so let's say, right, so cybernetics induces a teleological view of reality, or the cybernetic environment. But because it's about teleologies, right, there is not really a causal, you can't really create a causal relationship between the two. So it's not like, oh, the cybernetics were first and then came teleology. And it's more like both of those things sort of became perceptible at the same time. And that would mean that, you know, the technology that by which we try to understand how reality is and how reality is constructed, which would be cybernetics, is also the model of reality, becomes the model of reality. So we have like imagine you have a cybernetic black box in front of you, and then that becomes, then you become inside of it. I don't know how to, it's hard to describe, but imagine looking at your phone, right? You use your phone to navigate reality on basically all levels, right? That's just, I know it's a kind of crude example, but so it means that that what you hold in your hands actually governs the way you interact with reality. So it's no more that like you're in the outside world and then you just you just like in the 20th century, just I don't know, you just are or whatever. With the phone, you get a different, you exempt a different pattern of behavior, and that pattern of behavior could be attributed to an environment which, if you imagine it this way, right? So there's the image where like suddenly those soldiers find themselves inside the cube, right? So the functions, right, of this infrastructure and the behaviors that would result from it, right, could be attributed to an environment that you can't see, but you can derive from your behaviors. And that environment, that subtle, sort of almost invisible environment, would be what is revealed by the technology. I hope that was coherent enough.
Yeah, no. And so the singularity point is when there's perfect mirroring between the two,
Yes.
or
Yes. And then when you have and that would be like an eschatological endpoint, when there is a perfect mirroring between the way you interact with the medium and sort of how reality is constructed. It's perfect. Yeah. Now I don't know if I think it is possible, yeah, in the long run, but not right now, of course.
And so, because like this is maybe like purely a tangential question, but for example, because like I know, I think that this kind of early Greek philosophers also have teleological understanding of nature, where cybernetics is not a concept, or it's not a thing. So how do you see, for example, because like within this kind of normal kind of secular interpretation of science and so forth, like teleology is problematic and it's associated with religion.
Yes.
But through cybernetics, it gets reintroduced and complicated. So like, how do you understand that the early frameworks of nature are already teleological? Then we switch to this mechanistic period, and then
Yes.
again
Um,
teleology.
I would say that I think this is also it's important to understand what technology does, right? So science can deny teleology. We can all deny, we could deny logic if we wanted to, but if you create a technological superstructure that forces you, and that's what technology does, it basically I mean in the Western sense, right? Because for example, some other civilizations would invent stuff, but to them it would not become part of the environment, and they wouldn't change the very perception of how we frame a human. Here in the West, it does that. And this is where interestingly, technology counters science, or counter the frame of science. And it's precisely this is the ultimate function of teleology, not teleology, sorry, of technology, which is that to introduce you to different frames and to introduce you to a new telos, basically. And so the difference is only in yeah, I would say the prevalence of this, where back in the Greek days, not many people had to worry about teleology, and yeah, they could think about it, and yes, there is purpose to nature, right? But now it's everyone is put into the superstructure, which forces their perception to become teleological. So that's the difference. I don't know if that's a good answer to that question. So cybernetics is just the means by which we force humanity to contend with teleology, and technology is that's its purpose. It puts you into it initiates you into something, whether you like it or not. And that's also where it's the prescriptions against it come from, right? Because it's not a good, and it's also not a bad. It's just something that where people some people will get lost in it, and some will not. yeah, that's it.
Maybe I can ask you, like, because you are creating these images, diagrams that are kind of really interesting and like super advanced and everything. So you also have a theory that through images you start to get this kind of visions, precisely because kind of images are, I mean, we are back again at this question of belief and dreams and so forth.
Yes.
But like maybe you can speak some more about, for example, how when you are devising these images, for example, how you are kind of trying to kind of make connection with these patterns. Because, for example, like maybe I can slightly reframe the question. Because, for example, like this kind of being initiated or having the connection with the outside is connected to, I don't know, mysticism, ascetic practices, and so forth. But now, like terminally online people are, in some sense, also the ones who are kind of the closest to the signal and things like that. So I'm interested, like how you see this kind of many different routes that lead to this kind of most pure interaction with these forces.
Ooh, that's a hard question. I mean, I can give you a series of sort of connections, I guess. So an image is already it's non-linear, right? So there isn't a beginning and an end to an image. It's immediate, it's present, and so its perception, it depends on the resolution by which you can understand it, right? So so then it's all of its meanings are all on display at the same time. So let's say an image would be a compact mode of gaining insight into patterns, and then you can decipher in those patterns into, you can assign those patterns, right? So I talked about at the beginning how teleology and patterning, right, organizes sequences of causation, and so you can derive from these patterns basically something akin to an argument, right? So or like philosophical sort of statements, right, where you can have a proper I guess sequenced linear interpretation. So that's one, right? Then the other part is that I do the practice of active imagination, which was invented by Jung, and it's basically communicating with your own unconscious while you're conscious. And so there are a lot of images and a lot of the stuff I talk about actually originate there, where I would see an image, I would draw it down or write it down, and then I would like decipher it into something tangible, right? And so I mean, how that came to be, that's I don't know the exact mechanism of that. I'm not diagnosed with anything yet. Hopefully that stays that way. But yeah, I also don't recommend it to people. Don't do active imagination. It can really mess you up if you're not careful with it. And you know, I guess that's my practice. It's just like I guess, you know, yeah, right. It's like the internet, you know, the internet person. It's like getting way too much information and then try to coherently organize it. You know, one of the interesting things that I've been thinking about, and it may relate to this. So I don't know if you're familiar with Borges's short story, The Library of Babel.
A little bit, but I never read it.
Oh, that's okay. It's only the concept is enough. So you know it's like an infinite library, right? Which has every possible books within, of course, like I think or every book has 3,200 letters, and they have all and all the combinations, all possible combinations are there. Even the transcript of this podcast would be there, right? Even now, because they have it. Actually, you can look up the site. It's you can access it. But the idea is that already this concept sort of how would I say it, like de-times um writing. So just right now you have access to all possible writings at this very moment to you, right? It's you can access it all. The hard part is that yeah, you have all these coherent informations, but how do you get to it, right? So you have so we have let's break it down to parts. You'll see I'll bring it together at the end. So right, you have a way to represent something, which will be letters and writing, right? And it has its own logic, but yeah, we have all these parts, and then we have all possible combinations of these things, right? And then we have incoherent combinations, which result no meaning and have no purpose. And then we have super coherent compositions, which are like imagine in this library you would find a perfect book, right? Like the like which is just one-to-one to I don't know, like this transcript. Like finding this transcript of this podcast would be a coherent uh, way or book, right? Now, could you, if you live in this library, could you develop some kind of sense in which you can find the coherent from the incoherent, right? Because and this is such a good story because it gives you this informational world kind of that we live in, right? Um, and the thing is the answer of the I guess the empiricist would be that no, you can't do that. You can't sort of intuit yourself into coherence. It's just all it's all random, and there could be a calculation by which you can tell like how much books you have to go through to find one coherent one. And that calculation would be something akin to space, I guess. That would be space-time, right? However, the thing is that actually we already kind of do do the finding of coherence. And the way we do it is because is for example speaking, right? So speaking is a bunch of sounds and a bunch of signs that have meanings and that can cohere around different things, right? And so you can have an infinite amount of sounds that you can combine, and only partially some of it will be coherent. But when we speak, we assemble them perfectly, right? So that idea of having some kind of language, some kind of system, some kind of um, grid which we can represent something and then can speak it almost. I don't know if I'm making sense. So like someone speak it, that's how you navigate. That's how I would say I navigate these images. So it's like I kind of not perfectly, but I kind of speak its language, right? So then it coheres in these what I make, which I don't know if it's useful for anyone, but like yeah, that's how it works. And I do think that you can the idea of these for example the symbolic language, or even let's just say that the function of language itself, the sort of meta language, can create a way to okay, now I'm really in the deep in the weeds right now. I know. Tell me if like I'm saying something dumb, but the idea is that like you could develop a language that if you speak, you would see that happen in reality. I don't know if it's all the analogies sort of, I hope they stacked up correctly. But again, like the idea is that the how we speak and um, speaking meaning and speaking with purpose works could be analogized to you navigating the library of Babel to all the right books that you want to see. And those two things are actually equally possible. And if you have a language, like, you know, you don't have to have the book as a medium. You can have any type of medium, then you can do the same thing that you do by just speaking, for example, the medium of speaking. You can do that with any medium in reality. And if reality indeed is informational and it depends on coherence, then, I mean, you know, you can, everything is possible basically if you know how to speak it in some sense. I know I'm grasping at words at this point. But yeah, this also entails that the purpose by which you speak, right, and it produces coherences, it has a ripple effect in reality. So in some sense, you are participating in creation. Anyway, sorry.
No, that is perfect. Don't worry about being incoherent or things like that. Like maybe we touched on that a bit, but for example, the topic of madness is kind of important here. I know that you were joking during the middle of conversation about this sounding schizophrenic or things like that, but in some sense, like this loss of reality, as we also touched already, is kind of immanent in any kind of digital environment
Yes.
because of the loss of this grounding. So I'm interested because, for example, like the last issue of Shum Journal is based on angels. Let's say the title is Angel Mode. And when I wrote editorial for it, I quoted two of your Substack entries.
Oh, thank you.
Where you're yeah, no problem. When you're speaking about this communication between different realms and so forth, and for me, like this kind of angelic experience always happens when kind of one layer of reality kind of establishes a connection with the other, or where the communication, it's not dialogical, but kind of one-sided, and it has this kind of directionality to it. So for example, like when we experience ourselves in digital environments, for example, the functioning of the algorithm has precisely this kind of feel to it, because it's constantly leading us. And not only that, but it's kind of doing that outside of our kind of conscious comprehension or any kind of agentic way to combat that. So like I'm interested if like like if you have any kind of like for example, because even in media theory, like you were mentioning McLuhan and so forth, like even in media theory, the question of angels kind of became popular 10 years ago. And so interesting, like when for you does this kind of angelic communication happen? And also like, can we even talk about madness at this point when, for example, reality kind of entails this kind of fictional self-generating structure? Maybe you can just answer like focus on madness or the communication. I know this was kind of out of ordinary.
So with the angels, I would say that the angels that, so for example, algorithm wouldn't be an angel, it would be analogous to an angel, I would say. And how that analogy comes to be as a technical reality would be the act of the angel, right? Of the intelligence, the subtle intelligence, right? With algorithms, I think the only good way to counteract them is if you analyze, because it basically it uses your attention as its data point, right? So it gathers it sees like what where your attention is pointed, and then it tries to work with that, right? It tries to reproduce it. And so I think algorithms are actually pretty good if you already are in a pipeline, for example, and I think everyone is kind of, and then you can analyze like what gets your attention, and then just do a classical psychoanalysis on that, because it's going to be as good as dream reading, basically. The two, I think, are very much analogous, because you could say that the cybernetic is directly like jacks into the unconscious. The two are very similar, actually. I would also, maybe I would even say that the unconscious is exteriorized in the cybernetic superstructure, but the collective one, right? So it has all these hierarchies of bigger layers, and you can see this again analogized in the internet, right? So you can see again, Donald Trump is just such a good example, because everyone knows him, everyone knows who he is, and like the surrounding mythos around him, right? So you have Donald Trump, and then under him you have different factions, and then even in those factions you have different groups, and all these people sort of coalesce together, and you have different interests and all of this stuff, and but it is a hierarchy, right? So the internet, what it does in the real world, one of its effects is assembling these hierarchies. So that's a good way to understand how, right? Just like in the language of creation, right? So heaven gives the sort of the telos, and then the material sort of organizes around that, right? And we can see this with the internet in some sense, where it acts as this pseudo heaven, basically, which organizes hierarchies. What was the other question? Sorry.
Yeah, perfect. The other question was about madness, and if it's still a coherent concept in this technological environment, where like there are all of these changes that are usually associated with mad people, or with madness as this kind of structural property of the psyche that kind of
Oh yeah, I
precisely
know. Okay, I
derails.
understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the question of madness, I think, it depends on the coherence of your frame. So I would say that, for example, for like an empiricist, determinist, materialist person, they would basically deny the possibility of knowledge. So is that a type of madness? I mean, I would say yes, but we can see how the internet perpetuates all multiplicities of all variations of everything. I know that sounds okay. So like you can have any type of ideology with any type of configuration, with any type of, I don't know, political group, like I don't know, like a anarcho-communist, fascist, primitivist, Afro-nationalist groups. There probably exists something like that on the internet, right? So it perpetuates, it gives space. It's almost like it's landing. So it's like almost the internet is renting out the action of hierarchy creation, of like getting, like ordering yourself around the center. So you can just rent out one, if that's a good analogy. I don't know. And so all possible, even the most schizophrenic view has a center on the internet. And so, yes, it legitimizes all of it, because technologically it legitimizes all of it. But I think the internet, as if you view it as a sort of mind, which it is, because it's a gigantic connection, sort of like a gigantic matrix of connections, and it's very similar to how like a neuron or like a neurological structure is created, right? In the future, and it also implies, so right now it's very chaotic, but it also implies like every one of these sort of chaotic systems at the beginning. It implies a hierarchy in the future. So I do think that right now, all madness, all types of views, every one of them is legitimized technologically, but that will change over time. I think the whole thing will centralize because, it has to do with teleology, and then it necessarily has to find its omega point, its eschatology, and derive a sort of large initiatory superstructure that is unified, that can mediate its use in reality and to the public, right? So for sure there will be a time when they will say, okay, no, these things are madness, and we delete it from it's over. We don't allow it. We will not lend algorithmic technological possibility to these views. Right now it's a free for all. So go for it, everyone, go for it. I don't know. Just
yeah, maybe like for the end, one serious and one kind of almost for fun question. Like the serious one, like I know how familiar you are with Deleuze and Guattari, and for example, the two volume of Capitalism and Schizophrenia. But for example, like the concept of intensity is important for them, and also this kind of intensification that is directly connected to cybernetics. And we know that with CCRU, or for example, this text by Nick Land and Sadie Plant, Cyber Positive, famously there they kind of completely affirm positive feedback loop in relation to the negative, and the whole history of cybernetics is kind of reinterpreted through this full-on affirmation of positive feedback loop dynamics. So positive feedback loop is, in a sense, kind of intensification in the purest sense, at least how I understand it. So I'm interested in how you see, for example, the difference between the two, and and how, for example, the question of intensification ties into cybernetics and teleology.
good question. I would say that you remember the gap within the sort of the whole that is intelligent.
The outside, right?
So I would say that gap, which would be the sort of outsideness, right? It would be the outer heaven. It goes both ways, right? So it creates on the outset ever more so chaotic information, and it creates sort of it produces some type of entropy, but then the entropy itself is it has the form of intelligence. So this is a very strange union. And what that is, if we talk about intensification, is sort of, if you want to give it a very strong image, it's like the annihilation by the religious, or like the religious or the divine intervenes and, annihilates, it destroys, but it's intelligent, right? And there comes a certain ecstasy with that, for sure. There is like an ecstasy to religious sort of annihilation. And I would say that we are intensifying in a sense where we want the destruction of the world and the revelation of the truth at the same time. I think that's where this is going, and this is how you can see. I think this is the culture, like the obsession with World War III, right? From the system, the World War III is an absurd. Like you can hardly derive it. I think actually the global system is so intertwined. It's so dependent upon each other. No one's interest in a type of rational frame would produce a World War III. However, if you introduce this little gap that that intelligently acts and sort of intelligently destroys from the inside secular history, then it does end in like a brutal revelation that comes with annihilation. And that is the ecstasy of that intensification. You know, that is the ecstasy of the outside entering into secular history. So showing, you know, what's real and what's not real, basically. I don't know if that was not very much a theoretical answer in the strictest sense. So it's, but that's yeah.
And maybe like because I know that you are from Hungary, and in the upcoming issue of the journal, author Aaron Birtalan will again contribute their essay for the issue, and they are from Hungary. And for example, they say that there's a big tradition of LARP, live action role play, in Hungary. So, like, do you have any connection to that scene yourself? And also, do you have any kind of cultural interpretation of diagnosis for why, for example, LARP would find a fertile ground in the Hungary? Because even at the maybe let's keep it at that.
I'm gonna disappoint you. I never heard of LARPing in Hungary. Like, okay, maybe he's speaking about there are like these traditionalist pagans that do like the old pagan ways of Hungarians. They do like archery, stuff like that. But I think everyone has these groups of people, some kind of group of, you know, like those you know, there are people who, you know, reenact military battles. In the US, you have the Civil War reenactors. We have like these pagan reenactors, basically. I maybe that's what this is referring, but no, I have no connection to the LARPs. Maybe in his times, I don't know. Maybe he's older, because I'm a total Zoomer, right? I know in the 90s there was a big. There was like these right-wing parties, I guess, who had connections to like, you know, they did a little bit of marching here and there. They did a little bit of arching, I don't know, archery, riding the horse. I don't know. It's but I'm not connected. I don't know. Well, if it's entailed in the Hungarian culture, I mean, we are a people who are basically desperately trying to seek some kind of connection to our own past self, because we got so traumatized, so severely put down in the 20th century that we don't really have any connection to the people that we were in like basically 1920 and before. So like everything here is just basically the biggest roots, at least currently, the roots that we have are kind of lead back to the socialist era of where, you know, after 56, which was also something that was put down. So it's just not it's not it's a sad situation. I do love my country, but it's rough. Yeah. But I don't know about the law.
Yeah, no. Yeah, no problem. I mean, I just want to thank you again for answering my questions and for doing the work you do. So, yeah, thank you, and let's keep in touch.